All right, so here I am, refined painting. It's good to get some distance from your work every once in a while, and you'll see what's communicating and what's not. I want to separate that upper tooth from the lower tooth. So maybe show just a hint of other teeth on the top ridge there. And again, I'm just using, to finish off my digital paintings, I always end up just using the simplest tools, just a regular brush, playing with opacity, and playing with the brush settings, especially the shape dynamics. And then texture is helpful because you can get it to be a little bit cloudier, using the depth and taking the depth down. And it kind of sits on top of your lower levels of painting really well that way. And using Navigator to kind of move around quickly. And I see what more I have to do. It's quite a bit. But just working kind of confidently. Having fun with it. Digital painting is something that digital artists, especially freelancers, will do on commission, but they'll always charge quite a bit for it, mostly because it's risky, especially if you're doing kind of a portrait or a caricature commission. Digital coloring is a lot more controlled. If they like your sketch, they're going to like your digitally colored version. But digital painting, it's much more intuitive, and it's exciting for that reason, and you can get unexpected results. But I don't do a lot of commissioned portrait work because people don't like it when you experiment with their face. Now, as much as I've talked about having kind of the fun of choosing colors to paint with and making use of the full spectrum, every once in a while I like having that middle gray background, and I'll steal the middle gray color and kind of mix that in too. Because depending on the colors that are around it, that middle gray can look like a really cool temperature color. That's actually how Rembrandt did all of his greens and blues, because blue was such an expensive pigment, lapis lazuli, in the 17th century. And he didn't have a lot of money to do his portraits in the latter part of his life. He would just use really thinned charcoal gray pigment glazed over his warm colors, and it will look blue when surrounded by warm colors. And so I'm using the middle gray in that way in this very warm fur. And it has the appearance of being kind of bluish and greenish, just with the colors around it. If I actually use green, you'll see how shocking that looks in there. It looks like the bear has an algae problem. And this is all kind of the color theory, how the colors work together. It's a big part of painting. Not so important in digital coloring when you have your line work and your values of inking kind of holding everything together. And as fun as it is to work on these areas, you always have to keep in mind kind of choosing your battles and not spending too long in any just one area alone. I feel like the eyes are so important that I'll spend a little bit of extra time there. But whatever level I bring them up to, I have to match with the rest of the image. Otherwise, it will just look unfinished. And the real challenge, I think, when working with reference, especially when you only have one reference, you don't have multiple shots. If I were doing a job instead of just a demo, I would have multiple pictures to reference. Because the danger of just using this one photo reference is if the photo is bad, like it is on this side of the face, that kind of means your painting's bad because you just don't think of it. You don't see where you can improve it. But it's up to you to bring everything up to the same level. And I showed you the mixing brush to get started, and it's a great tool for adding some complexity to your color right away in your speed painting. But it's just a start, because to really control your painting, you end up having to replace every pixel with something you place by hand eventually. Computers aren't the artists, they're just the tool. Now, as the painter, you also get to edit your reference and make decisions. I don't like the really strong white that's coming off of this side. I think it's a little distracting on the photo, and so I tone it down in mine. But that's a decision I make kind of by pushing it both directions and working with it as I'm painting. And the reason people love painting, the ones who do, is because they get kind of lost in the process. You're just making thousands of decisions. This is something a computer would have a lot of trouble with. You're just always reacting to the last mark you put down. So it's incredibly creative and incredibly engaging, and you can kind of lose yourself in the process and spend just hours not realizing how much time has passed. But we're always making those intuitive decisions. When we are painting this way. I think digital coloring is a fantastic method. You can get really nice results that way. But it's much more kind of following the rules and following a set process. The joy of digital painting to me is that that's all loosened up. Now, when I originally did the mixing color, I mixed red into all this kind of face curtain color instead of just taking what was from the reference. And you can kind of see why. I've never regretted putting red on a face. Red is a color that has a dark value, but has such an intense kind of warm saturation. You can always put it around eyes, and it feels like blood flowing. It feels alive. And so I wanted that near the mouth and the face. And you'll find your own, as you continue refining your process in digitally painting, you'll find your own kind of tricks and methods that you use over and over again. So just like the bear's fur, human skin tones are never just one color. There's actually greens and blues and purples, especially where the skin is thinner and it's stretched over an empty socket, like underneath the eyes. or in the hollows of the cheek. And in your painting, you can really bring that out if you want with your color choices. Something photos can't really capture. And if you fail to do it in your paintings, you kind of run the risk of your painting looking flat and dead. And that's what the computer is able to do. It can take a photo and make it look flat and dead. You can go to Chuck E. Cheese and have it take your photo and then render it as a painting. But it's not going to have those little touches that feel more engaging and lively. There's a lot of debate in illustration schools at the moment around the world about how much traditional technique to teach and how much digital technique to teach. And I would definitely not want to see digital techniques replace all traditional training. But my hope is, even though these programs have done a lot more with digital in the last few years, my hope is that eventually they don't even need to make that choice, that you can make it up to the student whether they want to bring their canvas and paints to class or whether they want to use their tablet and their laptop, but that the training would be the same. You're learning the same basic understanding of color and paint handling, and holding the stylus will become more and more similar to holding a brush. That you can just use both interchangeably. Every professional digital artist I know also does traditional art. It might not be as practical professionally for the speed they're asked to work, but it really helps hone their skills. And there's always going to be something about the smell of the paint and the full body experience you get when using traditional methods that the computer has a hard time imitating. But I'll tell you what I really love about the computer painting is I don't have to clean up after. That's a big advantage. So at this point in the process, I'm wishing that this bear had less hair. And that's when I can start realizing I've kind of done my major battles and call the head finished, and now try to bring the rest up to that level. Free myself up to work a little faster. And this is the point in the demo where you usually go to a time lapse. It's just more of this for a long time until it's finished. Okay, but you remember the strength of your tools, right? And so now as I move on to this area that's not as structured as the face, I'm going to go back to my brush options, and I'm going to turn my color dynamics back on, where I'm moving between my foreground and background. And this way, I can load my brush with two different colors. And based on my pin pressure, I can kind of shift between them. I can even put in a hue jitter, which will actually subtly change the color. You see how it's going a little bit more yellow? I can play with the brightness, the purity, and basically get a brush that's a lot of different things all at once. You can see it over to the side. And that's going to be a nice finishing brush for these places where I don't really need to control the value so much.